Do you think of this as a modern and contemporary style of arrangement? I don't think so. I'll let you into a secret. This has been around since the late 80s, so it's not a modern and contemporary design. But keep watching today's video if you want to learn how to create a parallel arrangement just like this. Today's arrangement is a parallel arrangement, and if you've been taught one of these in a local college, then you've probably been taught a very rigid, straight design. But parallels come in lots of different forms, and the arrangement that I'm going to do today is a fairly basic version, although I've got some gorgeous florist flowers to create it with. There are a few rules to stick by. I would pick single flowers or line flowers like gladioli or delphinium, and I would avoid anything that's a spray flower, so spray carnations. Garden flowers like cosmos and scabious don't work particularly well. And each group of flowers needs to be arranged in a parallel format with the same flower and ideally the same colour in a group together, and you'll end up with a really impressive design. I think the biggest problem that people encounter when they try to do a parallel arrangement is they choose too many different flower types, too many colours, and they get very confused between the placements of flowers. So hopefully by the end of today's video you'll be able to create this gorgeous parallel arrangement. My container today is one of these zinc or aluminium long oval sort of shaped buckets, if that's a good description, and it's quite deep, and I don't want to use 2 blocks of floral foam in there because it's just going to be a waste. So what I've placed in the bottom is a block of dried foam, so I can reuse that at a later date, and therefore I'm not using lots of blocks of floral foam, which is going to end up in landfill. If I tip the bucket upside down, you'll see that there's a hole in the bottom, and that's because originally this had plants in it. I got this as a thank you gift, and it had plants from a supermarket that are now living quite happily in my garden, but I've been left with this nice container. The hole in the bottom will cause me problems because obviously the water is going to drain through the hole in the bottom. So what I'm going to do first is line it with an old piece of cellophane. This could be a plastic bag or a carrier bag of some description. As long as you know it's going to be watertight and it's not a bag that's porous, it's going to do a really good job. And then I'm going to sit my foam on top. It's on the other side. I'm going to sit my foam on top, and because it's quite a wide container, I'm going to put my foam flat into the container like so. Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you'll know that foam below the level of the container is better for modern style of arrangements. If you want to come out to the side to create some horizontal placements, then the foam needs to be raised up higher. But for today's arrangement, I don't have a whole range of material that I need to bring out to the side or the front. So that is going to suit this design much better. And it means I'm going to have less foam to cover, which means the design isn't going to be so cluttered and visually heavy at the bottom of the arrangement. I'm going to cut off the excess cellophane. So once all that cellophane has been removed, I'm just going to push it down around the block of foam. It almost acts as a wedge around the outside to stop my foam moving around, but that piece of foam is really secure inside, and I know it's not going to move around. Now, if we think logically about this design, my block of foam comes in 3 different sections. You can see it lined quite clearly on the top, and that's a really good guideline for beginners. I'm going to arrange my 3 main groups of flowers in each section, and I'm going to leave some clear spaces in between. Now, if you're not used to arranging in a parallel fashion, you're used to arranging everything from the centre coming outwards in a radial style, and this pattern that we're going to do today is different to the normal style of arrangement that you quite often learn at college. I think I'm going to leave the handle of the basket in the front, so it acts as a decorative element, but if you don't like it, you could always leave it at the back so you can't see it. And that's an indication that this is a front-facing arrangement that's only going to be seen from one side. Each group is going to have its own set of flowers, and I'm going to start initially with my gladioli. Now these are really tall. These are a florist grade. These are a florist grade. These are a florist grade. I keep going to call them chrysanthemums, but they are gladioli. These are florist grade gladioli, and they're beautifully tall. And you'll see with some of them that I've cut the growing tip off on the top. With this one I've left it on, and you can see the growing tip is slightly twisted, a little bit turned, and that's because it's trying to straighten itself up and move away from gravity. These get delivered flat in boxes, and what it's tried to do is to correct its growing position and stand up nice and tall. If you don't like that curve on the top, it's quite easy to remove it. That will encourage the lower buds to open faster. So if you want to slow down the speed that your gladioli are opening, then I would leave the growing tip on until you're ready to use them. They are a flower that opens quite quickly. They are seasonal, so here in the UK, they might be growing in your own garden. And what I'm looking to do is to go at least twice the height, at least twice the width of my container, because my container is longer than it is tall. So we always go with a longer measurement. And I'm thinking that this group is going to come towards the centre. And I'm back in the foam, 2/3 of the way back. I've left enough room at the back so that my foam doesn't disintegrate when I place my gladioli in. And what I'm going to do here is place 3 of them alongside one another, so I get that nice parallel grouping. And you can see that the stems are alongside one another. They're not splayed out on either side. And gladioli leaves work quite well in arrangements, so should you want to use them, they will last nicely and create a good visual line in your arrangement. And because this one is the most open, I'm going to bring this towards the front, a little shorter down, so that my parallel grouping is slightly stepped down towards the front. And that will make my first placement. In the middle, it's a good tip that before you start making a parallel arrangement like this, you just think about the placement and the colour distribution of your flowers, because you don't want to end up with all of your pink or your orange or whatever colour you choose to use all on one side of the arrangement. You want to try and distribute it. The colour I'm going to be working with is blue, and I need really to balance out as much of that colour as possible. I'm just going to lower this down so you can see the whole of the arrangement. You know how the foam has been placed into the container, and now you can have a really good view of the arrangement. Now my next parallel grouping is going to be the very pale blue delphinium. This is a gorgeous florist grade delphinium. It's not a flower that you often find in a supermarket, but you will be able to order it from your florist shop. And what you will find with the delphinium is it's a nice straight plant material, and this represents a line. So if you're not sure about how flowers are categorized, this represents a line, and it makes your eye travel up and down and gives an expressional value to your floral design. And I'm going to go slightly to the left, and I'm going to place them in a similar fashion to that group in the middle, but I want to get the heads to start at a different point. Now this style of parallel that I'm really aiming at beginners is a design that came to us in the 1980s. And I've been a florist since 1987. So back in the late 80s, this was quite a radical and a very interesting design that came over from Europe. I wouldn't class it as a modern design now, but back then it was a real trendsetter because we hadn't seen these parallel groups of flowers before. If you want to leave a bigger gap in between, you can. That's something I think that comes with a bit more confidence. But you'll see by the stem placement on the bottom, everything is quite regimented, almost like soldiers standing on parade, and there's nothing that's splayed out in that radial fashion. Now if I had a different colour, I would probably put a group over here, but I'm working mainly with whites and blues, and my next group is going to be another white flower and that's the nerine. Now this technically is a round flower because we have that big concentration of flowers at the top. But with a straight stem like this, the style of this flower works really well in a parallel arrangement. I mentioned earlier that flowers that don't work well are spray flowers, and that's because you don't get that really elegant line visible in the arrangement. I'm going to leave the stems of these quite clear so that you can enjoy them. But I know from a traditional arranger's point of view, you won't like the stem being seen, in which case, if you want to, you can cover it with some foliage, but don't overfill and clutter this arrangement up. It's meant to have a bit of space in between the flowers, even more than what I've done myself. My next flower is a flower that I very rarely use in floral design, or at least the colour is something that I don't normally use. And if you're part of my Facebook group, you will have seen these. This is a chinchirinchi or an ornithogalum, and this has been dyed blue. It's been placed in coloured dye, that's been taken up the stem, and you get that really interesting blue colour on the top alongside the natural white of the flower. Now I damaged 4 of these flowers when I was conditioning them, and you can see that I've snapped the head at the top. So I don't have a great deal of length available for these flowers to go in the arrangement. So what I'm going to do with this blue is continue the colour, or continue the line, not the colour, on the right hand side as you look at it. So I'm now trying to bring a bit of the blue colour onto the opposite side of the arrangement, because at the moment the white is all on one side and the blue is only seen in a small amount on the left hand side. Because they've snapped, I'm going to use them quite short, and I'm going to bring them in a slightly staggered line just underneath where those lovely nerines are. Now the nerine is a flower that is quite often seen in pink. This one is obviously a lovely white, and I had them in the week because I was doing a wedding and they really suited the style of the wedding. So to continue the parallel line on the right hand side, I've changed the colour combination towards the bottom to give me a more even distribution of the blue. One of the issues of working with dyed flowers is that you quite often end up with the dye on your hands, and it's the reason that I very rarely use dyed flowers, because that can be transferred quite easily onto a bride's dress, soft furnishings, tablecloths and curtains, and it can cause florists problems. So if you're new to this game, be careful when you're working with anything that's dyed. I do have one piece of spray material to use, and that's going to be my eryngium. And just like I only had a few of the nerines available, this is the last stem that I've got left in the studio. And because it has a nice shape to it, I'm going to use it low down at the bottom. What we don't want to do is have lots of flowers pointing in different directions. We need to keep our groups and our lines quite contained. And I think with it positioned slightly on its side, there's a really good visual line, and it's not splayed out in lots of different directions, which is what would happen if I used something like a spray lisianthus. Now that in a parallel arrangement just doesn't work at all. The heads are pointing in too many different directions, it gets very confusing. But what I can do is break them down into individual stems. I'm going to leave the foliage on for this one because I don't think it's too distracting. And I'm just going to place a section and a group of this flower type here towards the middle. And I don't think I need to have many flowers. I think one more stem is going to be adequate. What I really don't want to do is overcrowd it and make it really quite heavy and fussy. I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to bring it forward, and I'm not sure about that one. It's a little messy and a bit untidy. So I'm going to move that one and just put it facing a little bit higher towards the top. So each flower type is in its own space. We're not spreading them throughout. They're flowers that are in sections on their own, and therefore we have these parallel groupings of flowers. So far my parallel groups have gone upwards in a vertical position, but what I'm going to do here on the side is use some shorter pieces of the September flower to give me my width. You don't have to come out sideways if you've only got flowers that are tall and straight, like the gladioli and the delphinium, But I've got these beautiful arching branches of the September flower or the aster, which are going to work really well. Now I'm lucky enough to have some of this growing in my garden, and it's actually self-seeded on my driveway. So this has come from my own garden. It's one of those flowers that you have to be a little bit tolerant of because it looks quite messy. It self-seeds, and for a good few weeks you just have the foliage on it, and it looks a little bit untidy in the garden. But then when it does flower, it looks really fantastic. So what I've done on the side is I've brought out a parallel grouping horizontally, so I've got added width to my arrangement. Then on the opposite side, I'm going to add in some of the eucalyptus, and this has a really nice shape to it. It's slightly angled downwards, so it's going to repeat what's on the opposite side of the arrangement with the September flower, but it's going to give me a different colour and a different texture. And just like the opposite side, I'm placing it in a group horizontally so that I'm creating some extra width on the side. Now I have two foliages that I haven't yet used. The first one, you could debate whether it's a flower or a foliage. This is heather. Again, it's locally grown. This comes from a neighbour, so it's seasonal, but it can be at the stage where it's showing a small white flower. At the moment, this only has the greenery on it. And what I really need to consider, because it's quite a fussy greenery, there's lots going on in that. It's small, bitty, very, very eye-catching. I need to try and put it in the arrangement somewhere where it contrasts nicely against the foliage alongside it. I'm not going to put it next to September flower, even though the colour works quite well. It's too many messy foliages alongside one another. So what I'm going to do is add in next to the eucalyptus. So we have a matte flat finish alongside something that's a lot more fussy. And because it's got this sort of strange angle to it, the way it's been grown naturally on the plant, it gives me the ability to angle it here over the front of the container. I think I'm quite happy with that. If later on I feel it's too long, I'm going to snip it off. And then what I need to do is consider another group of foliage alongside that one. So again, I've got something that contrasts really nicely. And for my next grouping, it's going to be some of the Florist Italian Ruscus. Now I don't have a huge amount of this left. I've only got a few shorter pieces. I use this a lot for buttonholes, and I've always got spare bits hanging around. So what I'm going to do here is add in a little group alongside. And if you're not confident about leaving those gaps at the back of the arrangement and you really like to fill in all the space, then a tall piece of this Italian Ruscus or soft Ruscus, you might know it as, will work quite well. But the idea is that we don't spread it out in that very informal pattern. We keep it in groups where you can clearly see the texture. Then I have one final gap in this section here, and I'm going to go back with some of the blue or the greyish blue eucalyptus, just really so that we've got a little bit of a link in texture from one side to the other, and we use those elements and principles of design. Now, if you're new to floral design, and this is what this channel is really aimed at, it's aimed at beginners. If you're new and you don't understand anything about the elements and principles of design, they're sort of the guidelines and the rules that we follow. Some people do it intuitively and they don't need to follow any guidelines, but many of you might need a little bit of help. And that's why I designed a handy downloadable guide that you can download to your laptop or your phone or your computer that will give you a clear understanding of the elements and principles of design. You can follow the link in the description box, which is under the video. That will take you to the website. There are two documents, elements and principles, and it's better for you to buy both of them so it's much easier for you to follow. Now, if I just tip the arrangement forward or back so the arrangement can be seen from the overhead camera, you can see that there's still a lot of foam to be covered at the back, and there's also foam when you look at the arrangement from the top down. Let's just see if we can tilt that back. So this area here needs filling, and this area here. And in the area just between the eryngium and the delphinium, I've got quite a large gap. And I'm going to use a single flower or a spray. Now, I have spent the last 10 minutes telling you not to use sprays, But what I don't want you to do in this type of arrangement is take off the individual heads. But what we can do is cut this quite short, remove anything that's a bit unsightly or damaged or broken. I'm going to remove all the greenery, and I'm going to pop this chrysanthemum in this parallel position, not leaning forward. Just get rid of that one because it's broken. And I'm going to tuck it in quite nicely in that gap there, just so we don't have so much foam showing. So I'm going to push that chrysanthemum down a little lower than the flowers on either side, so we have those interesting levels, and not all my flowers are finished on one position. And to continue through the centre of the arrangement, I'm going to use some more of the heather because it's linking the texture that is through at the front. So a couple of pieces really low down in between the placements of the main groups of flowers. I can add in some small pieces. Now, if you were doing this for an autumn arrangement, you could use fruits or vegetables. You could use little mini pumpkins. You could use pebbles or mushrooms or anything that gives you ground coverage. You might have noticed in the little bucket towards my side that I have some grey leaves, and I wasn't planning on using them in today's designs. I'm not quite sure why they're in the bucket, but you might have got excited thinking that I was going to use them. And just while I recap on the floral design itself, I'm going to fill in the back to make sure that all of that foam is covered, because if the foam isn't covered, it's going to lose its water really quickly and dry out, and then your fresh flowers won't have a water source. So it's always important to cover the back, whether it's ribbon or moss or greenery like I've got here. It's an important step that you mustn't miss. Now, this style of arrangement might look quite modern and quite inventive for new florists and flower arrangers, but it is a design that's been with us since the 1980s. And here in the UK, if you're training to be a florist at college, you will learn a parallel as being a range of floral designs rather than one individual piece. If you've learnt flower arranging at a local college, you will probably learn that a parallel arrangement is something like this, and this is the only way it's done. But if we think about all those lovely designs that I've done on the channel that are in a meadow style, they are also arranged in parallel groupings. So depending on how you've learnt and where you've learnt, the description of this arrangement might be slightly different. But essentially, in this style, this very 1980s style of arranging, flowers are arranged in groups in a parallel style, so the stems go straight up rather than radiating away. Each group of flowers should be the same colour, the same flower and the same texture. And to create the best arrangement, it's better to stick with line material or individual flower heads like roses, carnations, chrysanthemum blooms, rather than trying to use up those spray flowers where the heads tend to point in a different direction. This is the part of the video where I ask you to subscribe, because it really does help people find us. We're almost at 20,000, which I couldn't imagine when I started this channel a few years ago. Give us a like, a comment in the box below, or share it with somebody that you know, and stay to the end of the video if you want to see close-ups of the individual flowers and the finished design. And I look forward to seeing you for the next video very soon. Bye for now.